Hey guys, on the left here I am signed in as user Bob, and over here I'm signed in as user Tom. And when I'm chatting between these two guys in a direct message, I want to see the messages pop up in real time. So when I'm like, hey Tom 2, I want to see it pop up. I shouldn't have to refresh the page for the message to come. So the way we're going to get this working is with GraphQL subscriptions, and we're going to do it similar to how we did with the channel over here. And how I can just type and it pops up right away. So that's what we're going to be working on, but we're going to make it work with direct messages. So right now we have it all commented out on our front end, but this is the subscription stuff for our messages. So we're going to go to our back end and get this working for direct messages. So for our messages, we created a type called subscription, and we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to copy that for our direct messages schema. So here I'm going to create a type subscription, and then here I'm going to say new direct message. Now, and then we're going to send a direct message. So to subscribe to direct message, you need to tell us the team ID, so int, and then also the user ID. So for example, over here, I would like to basically listen for subscriptions for Team 1 chatting with Tom. So any messages that I send or receive from Tom, I'd like to see here while I am in Team 1. Okay, so that's what we need to pass now. Let's create the actual resolver for this. And we can copy how we did our resolver here. So this is our message resolver where we create subscription. I'm going to copy that, paste it here. Now we have this permission thingy here. We're going to create a new permission for this, and we created this little pub/sub object here. I'm going to create just like a little folder for this. I'm going to call it pub/sub.js, and we're just going to export default new pub/sub, because you want to use, oh nice, it just automatically imported that for me, except it got it from the wrong place. I think that's a new Visual Studio Code feature where it tries to auto import for you. So we're going to create a new pub/sub here, and that's because we want to use the same pub/sub across our whole application. Okay, so now over here, instead of saying new pub/sub, I'm just going to import my pub/sub. So import pub/sub from the pub/sub file that we just created. And I'm going to do the same thing over here in my direct message. And we're going to be filtering on this guy too. So I'm going to copy the GraphQL subscriptions with filter. Okay. So I called it new direct message. And then here we're going to create a permission for this. We're going to say requires. So you need to have team access. We're going to just call this direct message subscription. Direct message subscription. So we're just going to make a specific permission for this exact resolver. And then here we're going to create our event. So I'm going to say const new direct message. And we're going to copy that, just paste it in there. So this is what we're going to issue. And now in our basically our filter here, we're going to check. So in the payload, I think we're going to pass the receiver ID and the sender ID. So we just want to make sure we're given in the args. If we come over here, we just pass team ID and user ID. And we need to know actually the current user ID, which I don't know if that's in the args as well. So why don't we just pass in so user ID we want to subscribe to, and current user. And actually we don't want to pass in the current user ID, because then they could pass in something they're not. We basically need to read the token to know who you are, and we're not passing the token in with our subscription here. so we actually don't know who you are. Unless, I can't remember actually, maybe we are. So if I go over to my index, we can see Slack server, here we go. Nope, that's my model, resolvers, schema, index. So scroll down to the bottom. Okay, so we are passing the models and the user. Okay, so I do have the user in the context, and that's fantastic. So that's what I wanted. I believe we're past a context for this. Yep, looks like we are past the context, so we can grab the user from this. Perfect. Okay, so the first thing is payload.teamid is equal to args.teamid. So we'll pass the team ID that we're creating a new message for, and then we're going to say and then in our Boolean expression here, we want to make sure user.id that we get from the args and the user ID here, either they're the sender or the receiver. So payload.senderID. So sender ID is equal to user ID, user.id, and payload.receiver ID is equal to the other guy, so that's going to be args.userID. So either this is the case, right? So the current user is the sender and the other guy is the receiver, or it's vice versa. So we want to check both of those. So we're going to put another, we're going to add another parenthesis there, and we're going to say or, and then here we're going to say payload.senderID is equal to args.userID. So we're just making sure these guys are both involved in this receiver, this message, and then receiver ID is equal to user.id. Cool. So if we get the right team and what both of these guys are the sender or the receiver, that's where we pass a message to them. So let's create also our permission right here, the direct message subscription. So that's going to be in our permissions over here, and we're going to export const, and I'm just going to copy this because it's going to be very similar. So we need to think about who do we want to allow to subscribe to this, and we're going to say oops equal sign. Who do we want to allow to subscribe to this messaging that's happening between Bob and Tom? So it can only really be either Bob or Tom subscribing to this, and Bob and Tom have to be part of the team. So what we're going to do is we have the team ID given to us from the args, and we also know the user. So we're basically just going to make sure both users are part of the team. So the user that we get here and this user ID. So we don't care about channel here. So here we're going to check and make sure they're authenticated, same check as we were doing before. Just making sure the person who's subscribing is logged in. And then here we want to check, and oops, we want to do find all. And well, we want to basically find two. So we want to see members, and we want to say where the team ID is equal to the team ID up here, and then the user ID is equal to either this or equal to this guy's user ID. So we're going to do an or here, and we did an or in the last video. So I'm going to copy how we did that and paste it in here. So basically we just say either it meets this condition, so the user ID is equal to user ID, or the user ID is equal to the user.id. And I forgot a comma somewhere. Here we go. Let that save. Okay, so we're expecting to find two members here that are part of this team. So we're finding the team, and then we're finding two members where either their user ID is the one that they got passed in, or the user ID that we get from the user that's authenticated that we get from the token. So here we're going to say if not members.length equal to 2. So if it's not equal to 2, we don't get two members, throw an error. Something went wrong. So there's like multiple things that could go wrong here. Like one of the members you tried to subscribe to is not part of the team, or we only that user doesn't exist, something like that. So we're just going to throw something went wrong here because we expect to get two users back. Okay, so that's good authentication for our subscription route for direct messages. Let's create the actual subscription where we pub sub this. So that's down here. So when we create a new direct message, we want to alert the subscription about it. So I'm going to comment this. And here we are going to say async function that we're going to run, and we're going to pub sub stuff. Now we made this an async function last time because I wanted to grab the current user from the models, but we actually don't need to do this. I'm going to get rid of that. And I actually did a database call for no reason, because the reason we did that last time is we wanted to get the username of that user. But we already have the username because we're storing it in our JWT token. If we check the auth over here, see how we're storing the username? So we don't actually have to look up the username. We actually know it already. And if we look at our front end over here, we need to pass back an ID of the direct message, the sender, the text, and created at. So we're going to say new channel. It's not what we want. We want new direct message. The name here, this is very important. So this is what's going to be passed to our front end and everything. This name has to match the name we have up here. So new direct message is here. So we're going to do new direct message here. And then here I'm going to put direct message, and then we have to do .data values because this thing is a SQLized object, not a regular object. And here the sender, we want to get its username, and the username of the sender we just grab from the user and grab their username. And that should have all the fields that we want. And this looks pretty good on our back end. So let's try calling the subscription now on our front end. And I'm just going to open up console. Nothing's crashing, that's good. So over here I'm going to comment this guy out, and I'm going to say direct message subscription. And this here we're going to get a team ID and a user ID, and this is basically the user we want to subscribe to. And so this is going to be new direct message, and we're going to just pass in our team ID and our user ID. And then here, this stuff here, we want it to match what we are getting here, so I'm going to copy that. And we're just going to get rid of this ESLint warning now because we are going to be using component will mount, this, all this stuff, and comment this stuff. Now real quick, we're going to be making changes to this subscribe function. So component will mount, we need to pass in the team ID and the other stuff. But real quick, what I want to talk about is a lot of people had issues with this subscribe function. Now this is something I kind of glazed over, which is my fault. So if you put curly braces around it like this, you're not actually returning anything here. You need to return this function because subscribe to more will return the unsubscribe function, which is what we're using. So getting rid of those, if you don't have curly braces and the arrow is just pointing to this, you're good. But if you use curly braces, make sure to return this function here. Okay, so now for subscribing, we need two things, right? So we need a team ID and a user ID. So new direct message, or not, yeah, it's new direct message. My autocomplete just is not working. Oh, I didn't call this new direct message subscription. There we go. New direct message subscription. And the variables here, we're going to get a team ID and a user ID. Now in our update query, we're going to update the direct messages. So direct messages, and the name of this is the name right here. And we're going to say previous direct messages, and then subscription data, new direct message. And new direct message here matches the name that we have here. Okay, so now we just need to call the subscribe function with team ID. This is good, so when we unmount, we're going to unsubscribe. When we mount, we're going to subscribe, passing in the channel ID. And when we receive new props, we're also going to change this, what we're subscribing to. So I believe we're giving the team ID and the user ID in the props here, and I'm doing this wrong, so let's fix that real quick. So we should be getting it from the props, and variables goes inside of options. We learned this in the last video. There we go. So the props object, options can take a function that passes props, and we return a new object like that. So in our props, we have a team ID and this.user ID, which is what we want to access up here. So this.props.team ID and this.props.user ID. Okay. And then same thing here, we're going to grab a team ID and a user ID. And we're going to say this.props.team ID is not equal to team ID or this.props.user ID. So either one of the IDs changed, right, is going to cause us to resubscribe. So we're going to unsubscribe to what we were subscribed to and then resubscribe here, passing in our team ID and user ID. Okay, that was a lot of work. Let's see if all this hard work pays off and we're able to subscribe with no errors now. So let's look at our console. Looks like we subscribed okay. I'm going to refresh here to make sure we subscribe there as well. Oops, we don't need to look at the page source. Inspect console, no errors here. Real-time messaging. Alright, we get data here, but we don't see anything update here yet. Alright, let's see what happened there. Did anything crash on the server? Nothing crashed on the server. Are we subscribing? Let's console.log. We just subscribed. Let's make this is very odd. We're getting no errors, just no response whatsoever. So this is us subscribing. So let's make sure that happens. And then on our server side, we can console log whether, I think what's happening is probably, oh, I know what's happening. We're not passing our guys right here. So we made this nice little filter function, but we forgot to pass in all the data. So we need to pass in here our team ID, the sender ID, and the receiver ID. Okay, so I believe a lot of these are coming from the args. Let's look at our schema for direct messaging. So direct message, we have the team ID and the other user ID. Oh, sorry, that was for that. Our direct message has receiver ID and team ID. Cool. Over here. So we can say args.teamID and args.receiver ID. And then the sender is whoever the current user is, so user.id. Alright, so now let's see if we get subscriptions. Now you see we get this little error here because the server is down for a minute. I'm going to restart. We see real-time messaging. We both just subscribed and won. Awesome. Now we can subscribe to our messages, M2, and we can send it from our user Tom, hey Bob, and we see Tom pop up over here. So very cool, we have real-time subscriptions working, and I'm just going to get rid of that console log that we added here. We don't need it anymore. And let's just make sure switching to direct messaging to different people works. So here I'm talking to Bob. I'm going to come over here and talk to Jim and be like, hey Jim, that works. And now I pop back over to Tom and I'm like, hey Tom. So we're able to subscribe and everything looks good. Cool. So that's it for this video, guys. We got direct message subscriptions working nicely. So that's very cool. And the next video, what we're going to be doing is I'll show you how I like to test in GraphQL. So we're going to be testing out some GraphQL resolvers and making sure everything is working how we expect it to. So I'll be putting this code up on GitHub, and I'll see you next time.